Have you ever wondered, what if the words spoken at the altar weren't a promise of devotion, but a silent threat waiting to unfold? My name is Isabella Crane, and on the night I said, I do, something inside me already knew I was sealing my own fate. The guests clapped. The music played. Everyone saw a smiling bride. But behind that veil, my hands were trembling. Not from nerves, from fear. I remember the way Marcus Hale leaned close as we exchanged vows. His whisper wasn't for the crowd. It was only for me. And it wasn't romantic. It was a sentence. Till death is the only way out. It sounded like poetry to them. But to me, it felt like the tightening of a chain. No one at that wedding saw the bruises I covered with makeup. No one heard the late-night threats behind closed doors. No one cared to notice that when he held my hand, it wasn't tender. It was a grip I couldn't escape. And yet I stayed silent, because that's what everyone told me a good wife should do. But silence has a way of echoing. And soon those vows, those words meant to bind us, would unravel into something far more terrifying than anyone at that wedding could imagine. Do you know how fast joy can rot into fear? For me, it happened before the flowers from the reception had even wilted. The morning after the wedding, I woke to silence. Thick, heavy, unnatural silence. Marcus Hale wasn't beside me. When I found him in the kitchen, he wasn't drinking coffee. He was staring at me with the same look he gave when he wanted control. He asked me why I had spoken so long to his cousin at the reception. Not gently, not curiously. It was an interrogation. I laughed, nervously, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But his hand slammed down on the table. The plates rattled. My chest did too. That's when I realized the vows weren't a promise. They were a contract. And every small smile, every word I gave to someone else was, in his mind, a betrayal. Later that day, my neighbor Harper Lane knocked on the door. She said she heard something in the night. Raised voices. A crash. She was worried. I lied. I told her it was nothing. Just nerves. Just laughter too loud. But it wasn't laughter. It was the sound of glass shattering when Marcus threw a wineglass because I didn't answer fast enough. That was the first day I learned what forever really meant to him. And it wasn't love. I thought marriage was supposed to make you feel safe. But each day with Marcus turned safety into a memory I couldn't touch anymore. Started small. He wanted to know who I texted, who I called. Then it grew. He checked the mileage on my car, the time I walked through the door. I began to realize I wasn't a wife in his eyes. I was property. One night after work, my colleague Ethan Ward pulled me aside. He asked if I was okay. Said I looked pale, distracted. I almost told him the truth, that Marcus had torn the strap off my purse during another argument, convinced I was hiding something inside it. But instead I smiled, because Marcus was waiting in the parking lot, watching. The fights got sharper. The walls of our home seemed thinner. Our neighbor Harper Lane knocked again, this time whispering that she heard furniture being dragged across the floor at midnight. I laughed it off, but inside, I was shaking, because she wasn't wrong. Marcus had shoved me against the dresser that night after accusing me of changing my tone. When I spoke, I remember the sting on my back, the cold edge of the wood, the way my breath left me in a gasp I couldn't control. And yet, every morning he left me a note on the counter. 2 words written in black ink. Remember forever. I read it, and for the first time I wondered, forever with him, or forever without me? I thought Marcus's words were only threats whispered in the dark. But then I found proof they were something more. It was a Thursday evening. He left for a business dinner, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of the house loosen. I opened his desk drawer. Inside, beneath receipts and bills, there was a leather-bound notebook. The pages weren't filled with meetings or plans. They were filled with promises. His promises, but not to me, to himself. Line after line, in his sharp handwriting. She belongs only to me. No escape, no betrayal. Till death is the only way out. I felt my chest tighten. Those weren't vows. They were rules. Rules he had written before we even married. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every whisper, every bruise. And then another thought chilled me more than the words in that notebook. What if I wasn't the first? The next morning, Celine Moore, my closest friend, came over unannounced. She pressed a photo into my hand. A woman younger than me, standing beside Marcus years before I met him. Celine's voice shook as she said, her name was Anna. She disappeared. The room spun. The walls felt like they were closing in. And for the first time, I realized my marriage wasn't just violent. It was a pattern. After Celine handed me that photo, I couldn't breathe the same way again. Anna's eyes stared back at me, soft but hollow, as if they were asking the question I didn't want answered. What happened to her? And would it happen to me? I searched Marcus's notebook again, this time more carefully. And tucked between the pages, I found something worse than his words. A faded photograph. Anna smiling at a lake. On the back, in his handwriting, forever. That word again. It wasn't love. It was ownership. I felt myself slipping. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my body went rigid, waiting for the outburst. Every knock on the door felt like a warning. Celine tried to pull me out of it. She begged me to go to the police. But how could I? The bruises were old. The notebook could vanish. And Marcus's charm, his perfect smile, could convince anyone I was hysterical. Still, the doubt was there. Not just mine. Detective Adrian Cross entered the story quietly, almost invisibly. He'd been following Anna's case for years, tracing whispers and dead ends. When Celine reached out, he agreed to listen. And when I showed him the notebook, his face didn't show surprise. It showed recognition. I've seen this before, he said, his voice flat. Different names, different women, same vow. That night, I stared at Anna's face again. Her smile haunted me, not because she was gone, but because I finally understood. Marcus wasn't promising me forever. He was promising me an ending. I remember the silence before it broke. The house was dim, the curtains drawn, and I could hear my own breath louder than the clock on the wall. Marcus stood across from me. His smile wasn't real anymore. It was stretched too thin, like something stitched onto his face. He said, "Why do you keep digging? Don't you see what it does to you?" But his words no longer had weight. They slid off me hollow because by then, I already knew. The warmth in his voice had vanished. What replaced it was a sharpness, a cold blade hidden beneath every syllable. I whispered back, "Where is Anna?" For a moment his eyes flickered, just a second, but it was enough. The charm he carried for years cracked. He laughed, low and broken, and it wasn't the laugh I once knew. It was the kind that makes your stomach drop. The walls felt closer. My pulse refused to steady. And in that moment, I saw him, not as the man who promised forever, but as the storm that had been building behind closed doors. When he stepped forward, I realized I wasn't asking questions anymore. I was standing at the edge of an answer I might not survive. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at Marcus, waiting for him to say her name. But the answer never came in words. It came in the trembling of his hands. He led me outside, to the back of the property where the earth looked disturbed. The soil was darker there, heavy with rain that had not yet dried. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. My body knew before my mind caught up. I dropped to my knees, clawing at the ground until the shape beneath appeared. A fragment of fabric, a strand of hair pressed into the dirt. Anna had never left this place. I looked up at him, and for the first time he didn't hide. His eyes carried no mask, no charm, only the hollow vacancy of a man who had finally been seen. I ran. I don't even remember how. My hands, my legs, all moving without thought, carrying me into the street where voices, flashlights, and sirens met me. The police pulled me back, but not before I heard Marcus's voice one last time. Low, steady, almost relieved. "You were never supposed to know." And that was the end. Not of the fear, not of the grief, but of his control. Anna's story ended in the soil. Mine began in the silence after. And if you want to hear the stories that others still try to bury, subscribe to the Veil of Secret, where the stories never leave you,